weekend. You know, when I think about Memorial Day in our armed forces, that statue from Iwo Jima kind of comes to my mind. I don't know about you. And I remember, John Wayne and the movies there, the Sands of Iwo Jima. Actually, they kind of do this flag there a little bit. But the 6 guys that planted this flag on Iwo Jima, when they had finally reached the crest, only 3 of those men would live to come back down that mountain. Some of them had to pay the ultimate sacrifice for the victory that took place. You know, God is big on memorials as well. We've taken what was a picture and we've turned it into all sorts of statues. Maybe some of you have this in your home, especially if you have a Marine in your family, because this stood in front of many Marine service quarters for many years. It was kind of their hallmark, if you will. But God is big on memorials as well. He tells the children of Israel when he gives them the 10 commandments, I want you to write these commands on the doorpost to your house. In other words, every time you leave your house and every time you come in, there will be commands over the top and on the sides so that you remember that I have a guidelines for you to live. Those guidelines aren't to be mean. They're there to keep you from going off the rails and wrecking your life. God's big on memorials. We talked about a few weeks ago. Jesus being a rabbi, at every corner of his garment there should have been a tassel. And those tassels were supposed to help the rabbi remember the commandments of the Lord. Everything you see in the Jewish community, they would wrap strips of linen around their wrist with the commands of God written on them. So God is big on memorials. We're going to be in Joshua chapter 4 here, and we're going to talk about a memorial that God has them set up. In Joshua 4, let's catch up to the story. Moses led Israel out of Egypt, a nation now from just 100 or so that went in when the famine happened, and all of that stuff went on. They leave Egypt nearing 1 million, just a passload of people, okay? They are now a nation. And as they go through the desert, God leads them to take over Jericho. The walls fall. They have a great victory. Now, I'm jumping ahead of myself. They go to the edge of the Jordan. Moses sends across spies. The spies go over. They study and they go, you know what? There's some big old people over there. Yeah, the land is great. There's lots of wealth, but we can't do it. And they come back and they go, we can't do it, Moses. We're not going. And all of a sudden, the gossip line starts. Everyone starts talking. And as they talk, they rise up and they're like, we're not going. So God goes, okay, you're not going. You're going to wander around in the desert for 40 years until all of you people that took a vote to say you're not going die off. And then I'm going to take your kids in and they're going to enjoy my blessing. And that's what happens. Even Moses dies on the other side of the Jordan River before he sees the promised land. Because remember, Moses, instead of speaking to the rock, strikes it to get water to come out when God told him to speak. So Moses' temper, even as a leader, he is penalized for not following God's rules. Understand this. God means business when it comes to his commands and his rules. He extends grace and mercy, and we are so thankful for that. The very fact that the human race is still around today, that he did not zap Adam and Eve when they took of that fruit thinking they knew better, is proof that God has grace and mercy. But a lot of times, because he does extend grace and mercy, I think we take it for granted so much. Everyone dies. Moses can't lead them. A new leader rises up, and his name is Joshua. Joshua is instilled as the new leader. And as they're getting ready to go over into the promised land, Joshua does the same thing. He sends over some spies. They come back, said, hey, they're just ready for the taking. And they're getting ready to cross the Jordan and head into the new land. And as they get ready to head into the new land, God gives Joshua a command. And Joshua then relays this command onto the people. In Joshua 4:4, then Joshua called the 12 men from the people of Israel, whom he had appointed, a man from each tribe. And Joshua said to them, pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and take up each of you a stone upon his shoulder. Now, before we read on, I might want to tell you that God had said, hey, You take the Ark of the Covenant on the priest's shoulders, and as they enter the Jordan, it's going to separate. I'm going to provide a path for you. When the Jordan is in flood stage, which is something we can understand, imagine if God told you, I want you to go down to Carter's Landing, and you were going to cross at the widest point of the Illinois River there where it comes into Lake Tenkiller, and you're going to walk across on dry ground. How many of you are up for that? Oh, I want to see it. Do I believe it? I don't know about that. That may be something else, right? Especially now that sucker is roaring. If you step into it, you're going to be taken down into the lake pretty quick, aren't you? But Jordan is at flood stage. God says, you are going to pass over. I'm going to make a way. But I want these men to stop, and I want them to grab these rocks. And God, in the midst of the Jordan, take each of you a stone upon his shoulder according to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel, which is 12. That's why he called 12 men. Now, when he says grab a stone, you're walking across the river. How many of you are going to grab a stone you can hold into your hand? Oh, probably me. He says grab one that's going to be on your shoulder. That's a pretty good size stone, right? That's going to make some sort of rock pile. That it may be a sign, verse 6, among you, when your children ask in times to come, what does this stone mean to you? 12 large shoulder-carrying type stones are going to be erected on the other side of the Jordan. Now, the Jordan River is a place where they gather water. It's a fertile place. They would put crops along the edges of that river. This stone monument that they are erecting is going to be seen by many people for generations to come. Verse 7, then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. When it passed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the people of Israel, here's the word, a memorial forever. See, the whole part of a memorial is I want you to remember. I want you to explain to people, if they weren't there, what happened. Now, have you ever known a good storyteller? I mean a good storyteller. See, there's storytellers and then there's good storytellers. A storyteller can tell you what happened. My daughter loves to tell stories. When she tells you about an event that should take a minute to tell me what's going on, it takes 5 to 6, right? I might as well settle down for it. I go ahead and put her on speaker, take it off my ear, right? So my ear doesn't get sweaty. I'm going to listen to my daughter's story because she's important to me. My daughter likes to tell stories. She likes to make you feel like you're included, like you know everything that's going on. Then there are storytellers, right? Then there's the guy that when he says the bird flaps his wings, I mean, he gets up there and flaps his wings, right? They can make you feel like you are in the story. Usually the people that are real good storytellers are the people that experienced it, right? They can tell you about lasagna, and you're like, yeah, I've had lasagna. But when they tell you about lasagna, you can taste the garlic in your mouth, right? You can feel the texture of the vine-ripe tomatoes as they explained to you about this lasagna they had. That was incredible, right? That's a storyteller. The story comes alive. See, this memorial was meant that when people saw it, the interaction, the saving that God brought that day was to bring God's presence to them that day and make it come alive. Hey, those stones, guys, by the way, everyone would look at those stones and know those stones don't belong there. You ever done that? We went up a mountain. You saw the picture there where Hanson, to my knowledge, didn't try and throw Tristan off, but they were there on the edge. But they were there on the edge, right? As we were going up and down that mountain, you'd look up and you would see rocks that were stacked on top of each other. And this big, huge rock is on top of the littler rocks. And you're like, there's no way that's natural because that rock shouldn't be landing that way. They might have done it to make us go, there's no way, we don't know, right? But there are rocks that just didn't seem to be in the place they should be. These stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan River would have been worn smooth. Maybe their color would have taken different hue because they'd been underwater and been hit by so many different things as they came down the Jordan River. So when these stones were placed on the bank, anyone walking by, again, 12 stones is going to make a decent-sized monument. Anyone walking by is going to go, why are those stones that don't belong there? And here comes the opportunity to tell their kids, oh, let me tell you about it. In generations to come, I wasn't there, but Grandpa told me about it. Grandpa told me about how they all came to the edge of the Jordan, how they were into ankle-deep mud, but then all of a sudden that mud seemed to turn to dry ground when the Ark of the Covenant came and started entering the waters. Great-grandpa didn't believe that this was going to happen. He was kind of way back in the crowd, so he was having to hear from the people up front as they kept passing it back. Hey, the waters are receding. The waters are receding. Every one of them would have had a story to tell about what happened on the Jordan that day. The end of the story, verse 25, and the Lord said to Joshua, command the priests bearing the ark of the testimony to come up out of the Jordan. They stood in the middle of the Jordan until the entire nation had crossed the Jordan during flood stage. So Joshua commanded the priests, come up out of the Jordan. And when the priest bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord came up from the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priest's feet were lifted on dry ground, the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all of its banks as before. God's promise was fulfilled. That memorial, those rocks that were placed there, the things that would catch their eye, it was meant as a provoker to invoke or provoke or get conversations between people and their kids. It was meant to invoke emotion. It was meant to remind them of how mighty their God is. Do you have any memorials in your house? It seems anymore. I know at our house when we moved and we built this, man, it's been 5 years ago. I can't believe we've lived in our house for 5 years now. But 5 years ago, we took the boxes that we hadn't even opened when we moved to Oklahoma and got out some pictures, and we put pictures on a wall. Anybody even print pictures anymore? Now there's digital frames, right? You can just airmail them to your digital frame and it'll put them all up on there. But those pictures on the wall, some of them are pretty old. We have some of my wife's dad when he was a cadet years ago. It's actually in one of our hallways. There's pictures of us because we didn't have digital photography when we were first married, when we were first engaged, and all of that stuff. But those are memorials, right? When I see the picture that's on my computer, it's a picture of when my wife and I got engaged. And we're sitting on the fireplace in her parents' place. I can still remember all of that stuff. I can remember the smells that were going on from the kitchen because we ate the same thing every Christmas morning that we ate there every time. All of that stuff comes back because there is a memorial. And I can explain to my kids about that stuff. One year, a couple years ago, we were coming back from Branson, and I had heard this on the radio. And I'm like, this sounds like a good idea. I'm going to do it. And, of course, my kids hated it, but I didn't care. I made them do it. From Branson back here to Park Hill, we went through the life story of the Wolf family. How we met, places we moved, the houses we lived in, the schools my kids attended. There were different ones because we've served in different churches. We went through the whole history of our life. Why? Because I wanted my kids to know it. And more importantly, we made much of those moments where God was in each part of our stories. Memorials, remembering God. Have you set up memorials in your life, opportunities where you remember God and you're able to share what God has done to your kids and your family? And this is going to sound, trite or minimizing, and I'm not trying to do that. But guys, it goes beyond having a cross in your hallway in your home. There are crosses everywhere, right? I have worn my Ask Me About Mephibosheth shirt. I wore it in Arizona. You know what? As much as I thought people might ask, hey, what is Mephibosheth? No one has ever asked me when I've worn that shirt, who is Mephibosheth? I don't know why. That's a name you don't hear. But that thing has never instigated the conversations that I would hope wearing that shirt would. But you know what? When members of our team show kindness, when Jordan's telling stories, even though we were in a place that by law, quote, we couldn't say the name Jesus, the word they use is we can't proselytize. You know what's amazing, though, and the same is true in our public schools, teachers may not be able to say it, but you know what? When a kid asks a question or when a kid says, I know that story, I heard about it in church, guess what we get to do? We get to expound on what that kid just said. There's the opportunity to show love and concern and care from God's word. Memorials. Are you making the most of the memorials that God would have you place in your life? This weekend, I don't know how many people do it. It's a weekend, a lot of people go and decorate graves, right? Those graves are a memorial. My uncle, who he's a bit older than me, we went back for my grandfather's funeral again several weeks ago, and he did the graveside, and he gave the whole etymology of the word gravestone, where it comes from. And he took it all the way back, and it does go all the way back to Israel and their use of stones, right? How many of you, I like to hunt, been out in western Kansas, excuse me, been a lot of places. When we were in Minnesota, I saw this as well. There would be pylons of stones out in the middle of the Minnesota prairie. Do you know what that pylon of stones was? Not just the fact that Minnesota is kind of like Oklahoma, it seems they grow stones, but that pile of stones was a marker of the property. There's the corner of the property. In the middle of nothingness, there are a pile of stones showing here's the edge of the property. See, this marking method that God instituted is used and carried on to today to where we get the idea of monuments. This pile of stones. When you see it, you ask why and you remember what went on. So when you see gravestones, have you ever looked in a graveyard? Right? Ever read some of the captions? A lot of them just say born and died. There's not much story to be told there. My mom is cremated and doesn't have a headstone. My mom has 3 kids. My dad is still alive. The investment in the multiple kids that my mom invested in when she taught Christian school for so many years is her monument. But as we went back to my dad's house, some people wanting to show concern for our family, they had cut out a monument, if you will. We had planted a tree back on the original homeland up in West Virginia, and a guy that had a plasma cutter cut out these things to put by the tree, and he gave us some. Now, when we went back and we cleaned out my dad's house, we found these. That show you how important these monuments are to us. Got rust on them. This was sitting in my garage. I had to have my wife get it because I forgot to get it. It says, in loving memory of Susan Jean Wolfe, July 8th, 1948 to June 12th, 2016. That's when my mom lived and died. Now, the important thing that had my mom had a monument, which she didn't need, doesn't need, but the important thing about this, you see the apple, right? Tells you my mom was a school teacher. That was her life, training people, investing in them. You can see from that that's important. But if you could see this to read it, you would read this. God is the blessed controller of all things. That is my mom's life. I heard it a gazillion times. God is the blessed controller of all things. When we would get mad that something didn't go our way, you know what we heard? God is the blessed controller of all things. When we were in a little VW stinking little blue bug going to West Virginia in a snowstorm over Christmas, and she goes in to try and find a hotel room because we cannot go any further because they've shut down the highway, and guess what? There's no rooms left. Again, a Volkswagen Bug is not very well insulated, if you didn't know that. It is a cold little thing, right? The back seat's better because, again, the engine's in the back, right? Which ought to tell you it doesn't heat the whole inside very well because you got to bring the heat from the back to the front. And if you're going forward, guess which way the wind is pushing the heat? Back! When we pull in there and there's no room, and my mom looks at us and goes, well, you know what? God is the blessed controller of all things. And then the trucker who just got a room says, you can have my room because I can sleep in my truck. Guess what? God is the blessed controller of all things. I can go story after story of where my mom built into our freaking little heads, no matter where we are in our lives, she was going to make sure that we knew God is the blessed controller of all things. A monument. See, all monuments aren't stones. But are we putting monuments in our lives? Are we putting monuments in our family? That when people see them, when things happen, that we tell them about what God has done. Memorials are important. I hope that you understand the importance of memorials. I hope that you are erecting memorials that point people to God. There will come a time, believe it or not, when people don't want to remember God anymore. We've seen it in our nation, right? We don't remember our terrible past. We've taken down some of the monuments that reminded us of that. The problem is when you take down those monuments that remind you of your terrible past, guess what you end up doing? You repeat it. Because we forget that we tried that and it didn't work. Hey, when people ask, how did you get here? Are you big to tell them about how God fashioned every step? When we had the tire go out on the van, we were heading down the road. It started like most things do, right? There's a little shake in the van that was annoying the heck out of me and Hanson. The other two didn't know what was going on. They had their earbuds in. Jordan's watching the softball World Series. Who knows what Tristan's watching? I don't know. But Hanson and I'm like, we need to check those tires when we stop. And that little bump all of a sudden came to a thud, 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 thud. And we're like, oh no. Get out of the car, all the tires are up, but then Hanson looks and there's a big old bubble on one and the threads are showing. Of course, that was on his side. We found the problem, right? Didn't realize the extent of the problem until we pulled into Walmart and the guy goes, you don't need one tire, you need two. Had we stopped on the road, changed the tire, we would have been, right, up Defecation Creek without a way of propulsion. If you don't know what that is, up a creek without a canoe, right? Because we would have wasted our one bullet on something that wouldn't have fixed both. But because God is the blessed controller of all things, when we called Walmart, they were willing to stay. They only had 2 tires, by the way, if someone needs tires. They weren't the right tires, but they fit on the rim, and they got us where we needed to go. And that's why we were at Walmart for 4.5 God-blessed hours one night, waiting for a guy to put back on the right tires on all 4 tires. But because God is the blessed controller of all things, there was no blowout. There was no worry about me trying to stay on the highway because God knew what needed to happen when it needed to happen. Our whole trip last week was God as the controller of all things. Because as I told the crew, and I'll tell you, of all the missions trips that I have led or been on, this one had more things not go the way that I thought they should go or wanted to go, the most. The most. I've been to Guatemala umpteen times. 14, 15, I can't even remember. I've never had the complications like this. Having said that, these complications weren't bad at all. Why? Because God is the blessed controller of all things. Moms, dads, are you telling your kids about the important milestones God's brought in your life? Kids, don't glaze over, don't miss those stories, because one day, trust me, it's going to come, and you're going to want that comfort. Memorial. We're so thankful for all those who've given their lives for our country. We are so thankful that Jesus Christ said, when we couldn't fix our sin, I'll go die in their place. We have a memorial of that, right? We have a cross. But more importantly, we have an empty tomb. Because that means this life, everything that happens in this life, isn't the end. We're going to spend eternity in heaven with God. Amen. Hey, let's not miss the opportunities to tell people about what God has done when we see those memorials. Let me close in a word of prayer. Father, this morning, as we think about all you've done, as we think about the memorials that are before us, a lot of it literally is people. People whose lives have fashioned our lives, people who have invested in us. And when we see them, we are so thankful. Some of our memorials this weekend bring emotion that is hard to bear. A parent that's lost a child that's lost a parent, spouses that have lost loved ones. As they go through this Memorial Day, it seems the emotions just seem to weigh heavy. But thanks be to God, because of what you've done through your Son, we do not have to despair over death. We know that there is victory through Jesus Christ. Forgive us when we take over those memorials that you had us build, when we tell about stories of great accomplishments and we forget to mention your name. You're so good to us, so good to us. Father, thank you for your blessings. In your name we pray. Amen.